Picture this. It's a peaceful Sunday morning. Then, in just a couple of hours, a single, shocking attack completely changes the course of history. We're talking about December 7th, 1941, the day that dragged a reluctant America right into the heart of the biggest war the world has ever known. So here's our game plan. We're going to look at what was happening before the attack, then dive into the high-stakes plan behind it. We'll cover the attack itself, see how it exploded into a global conflict, and finish with the big question historians still debate. Was it a brilliant strategy or one of the biggest mistakes ever made? All right, first up, a brewing conflict. You know, an event this massive doesn't just happen out of the blue. There's a whole backstory here, and to really get it, we need to rewind a bit and see why these two countries were on a collision course. Okay, so let's set the scene. What was Pearl Harbor? Well, it was America's biggest and most important naval base in the entire Pacific Ocean. Think of it as a massive parking lot for the U.S. Navy's mightiest warships right in the middle of Hawaii. It was a huge symbol of American power. The problem really boiled down to this. Japan and the U.S. wanted completely opposite things. Japan was on a mission to build a massive empire in Asia, and it was invading its neighbors to get the land and resources it needed. The United States, meanwhile, saw this and wanted to stop it. You can see all this was going to be a problem, right? So the U.S. decided to use its economic muscle. It slapped trade restrictions on Japan, but the real killer blow was a total oil embargo. Now, you got to understand how serious this was. Japan got most of its oil from the U.S. Without that oil, its entire war machine, its ships, its planes, its tanks would grind to a halt. This single move put Japan in a huge bind. And that brings us to Japan's incredibly high-stakes plan. With their fuel supply cut off, Japan's leaders felt totally cornered. They believed they had to make a choice, and they had to make it fast. They basically had two options. Option one, give up. Just abandon their dream of building an empire and give in to what the U.S. wanted. Or option two, go for broke. Launch an all-or-nothing attack on the United States to knock them out of the way and then take all the resources they needed by force. Well, they chose option two. The plan was an incredible gamble, but the logic was actually pretty simple and brutal. They figured if we can launch one massive surprise attack and wipe out America's Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, the U.S. will be too crippled to stop us. It was designed to be a knockout punch. And so that brings us to the day itself, that quiet Sunday morning that was about to go down in history. The plan was officially in motion. Think about this for a second. More than 350 Japanese planes launched from aircraft carriers hundreds of miles from Hawaii. They came in two massive waves, swooping down on a completely unsuspecting base. No one saw it coming. The surprise was absolutely devastating. I mean, just look at these numbers. The U.S. lost nearly 2,400 lives, almost all of its major battleships were sunk or wrecked, and hundreds of its planes were destroyed on the ground. And Japan's losses? They were tiny in comparison. It was an overwhelming military victory. So it looked like a perfect success for Japan, right? Well, not quite. The victory wasn't as complete as it seemed, and as it turns out, the few crucial targets they didn't hit would come back to haunt them in a big way. So now let's talk about the aftermath. Japan thought it had removed a major threat. What it had actually done was something far different. One of their own admirals famously worried they had awakened a sleeping giant. And he was right. The consequences were immediate, and they changed the entire world. The very next day, a furious President Roosevelt went before Congress and gave one of the most famous speeches in American history. He declared that December 7th, 1941 was a date which will live in infamy. And that was it. There was no more debate. With those words still ringing in the air, the United States officially declared war on Japan. America was now in World War II. This changed absolutely everything. Before the attack, most Americans were isolationists. They wanted nothing to do with this war. But overnight, the country unified with a single purpose. And then, just a few days later, Japan's allies, Germany and Italy, declared war on the U.S. too. Suddenly, America wasn't just in a war in the Pacific, it was in a war in Europe too. World War II had officially gone global. Okay, so let's zoom out and look at the big picture with some hindsight. Was the attack on Pearl Harbor a brilliant strategic move, or was it a colossal mistake? Did it actually work out for Japan in the end? And here's the great contradiction of Pearl Harbor. In the short term, it was a huge success. They absolutely weakened the U.S. Navy. But in the long term, it was a complete and total failure. Because in attacking America, they had just poked a very powerful enemy that was now wide awake, furious, and ready to fight to the end. So why exactly did it backfire so badly? Well, a few key reasons. First, the most important American ships, the aircraft carriers, weren't even in the harbor that day. They were out at sea on a mission, a huge stroke of luck for the US. Second, the Japanese planes never targeted the base's massive fuel supplies. Leaving those intact meant the US could recover way faster. And finally, Japan just fundamentally underestimated America's industrial power, its ability to build ships, planes, and tanks on a scale that no one else could match. And that brings us back to our final big question, the one people still debate. Was Pearl Harbor a brilliant, daring military plan that almost succeeded? Or was it a fatal mistake from the very start, a move that guaranteed Japan would eventually lose the war by waking up a powerful and very angry nation? What do you think?